Deep beneath the marble floors of Vatican City, behind walls that have stood for centuries, lies a secret that could rewrite everything we think we know about human history. In rooms where no tourist will ever set foot, where even the most distinguished scholars are turned away, the Catholic Church guards manuscripts so dangerous, so revolutionary, that their very existence has been denied for generations. Tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain on the Vatican's most forbidden collection. We're talking about documents that challenge the foundation of Christianity itself, texts that reveal hidden knowledge from civilizations thought to be myth, and prophecies so terrifying that popes have ordered them sealed away from human eyes forever. This isn't speculation or conspiracy theory. These are real manuscripts, catalogued and locked away in the deepest vaults of the Vatican's secret archives. But here's what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. Some of these forbidden texts are finally starting to surface. Leaked photographs, testimonies from Vatican insiders, and documents that somehow made their way into private collections are revealing glimpses of knowledge that was meant to stay buried forever. And what they contain will shake you to your core. I'm about to show you evidence of manuscripts that describe technologies we're only beginning to understand today, written thousands of years ago. Ancient texts that map out star systems we've barely discovered, penned by civilizations that supposedly never existed. And perhaps most disturbing of all, prophecies that have predicted every major catastrophe in human history with terrifying accuracy, including events that haven't happened yet. My name is Alex, and for the past 3 years, I've been investigating the Vatican's hidden archives through contacts inside the Church, leaked documents and manuscripts that have somehow escaped their vaults. What I've uncovered goes far beyond what any documentary or book has ever revealed. We're talking about the biggest cover-up in human history, involving knowledge that could fundamentally change how we see ourselves, our planet, and our place in the universe. But before we dive into the forbidden manuscripts themselves, you need to understand why the Vatican would go to such extreme lengths to hide this information. Because once you see what's really in those vaults, you'll understand why some knowledge has been deemed too dangerous for humanity to possess. The Vatican's secret archives aren't just a library. They're a fortress of information, protected by security measures that would make Fort Knox jealous. We're talking about documents stored behind blast-proof doors, in climate-controlled chambers, guarded by Swiss guards who've taken vows of silence about what they protect. The official collection spans over 50 miles of shelving, but that's just what they admit to. Intelligence sources suggest the true collection could be 10 times larger, hidden in subterranean levels that don't appear on any architectural plans. Here's what's truly chilling. The Vatican has a classification system for their most sensitive documents that goes beyond top secret. They call it Secretum Omega. Documents so dangerous that only 3 people on Earth are authorized to read them. Not cardinals, not bishops, not even most popes throughout history. Just 3 individuals, and when one dies, their replacement is chosen in a ceremony so secretive that no record of it exists. But why manuscripts? Why would handwritten texts be considered more dangerous than nuclear weapons or biological warfare? The answer lies in understanding that information, real knowledge about the nature of reality, is the most powerful force in the universe. Control information, and you control everything else. Think about it this way. If you discovered proof that human civilization was far more advanced in the past than we believe today, that would revolutionize archaeology, history, and our understanding of human potential. If you found evidence that we're not alone in the universe, and that contact has been happening for thousands of years, that would transform religion, science, and geopolitics overnight. And if you uncovered prophecies that could predict the future with absolute accuracy, whoever controlled that information would essentially control the fate of nations. That's exactly what the Vatican is sitting on, and they've been sitting on it for centuries. Now, you might be wondering how I know all this. How does someone like me gain access to information that's supposedly locked away forever? The truth is, the Vatican's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness: people. No matter how secure a vault is, humans still have to access it, catalogue it, and maintain it. And humans, no matter how devoted, sometimes develop a conscience. Over the past few years, I've been contacted by individuals inside the Vatican who can no longer remain silent about what they've seen. Archivists who've spent decades cataloguing forbidden texts, translators who've been sworn to secrecy about what they've deciphered, and even clergy members who've begun to question whether keeping this knowledge hidden serves God or serves power. These aren't disgruntled employees or conspiracy theorists. These are deeply religious individuals who've dedicated their lives to the Church, but who've come to believe that hiding the truth is a greater sin than revealing it. They've provided me with photographs, translations, and testimonies that paint a picture of a collection so vast and so shocking that it defies imagination. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Vatican isn't just passively hiding these manuscripts, they're actively studying them. Deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, teams of scholars, scientists, and theologians work around the clock, trying to understand and decode the most significant texts in their collection. We're talking about linguists who specialize in dead languages that supposedly never existed, physicists who study ancient descriptions of technologies we can barely comprehend, and historians who are rewriting the timeline of human civilization based on what they're finding. And some of what they're discovering is so paradigm-shifting that it's causing a crisis of faith within the Church itself. Sources tell me that certain manuscripts contain information that directly contradicts fundamental Christian doctrine. We're talking about texts that describe Jesus in ways that would revolutionize Christianity, documents that reveal the true origins of biblical stories, and prophecies that paint a very different picture of humanity's spiritual destiny. The question isn't whether these manuscripts exist, they do. The question is, what happens when this information finally comes to light? And make no mistake, it's starting to come to light. Digital photography has made it nearly impossible to keep secrets forever. Artificial intelligence is helping to decode languages that have puzzled scholars for centuries. And a new generation of Vatican employees, raised in the information age, are beginning to question whether any institution has the right to hide knowledge that belongs to all humanity. But the Vatican isn't giving up without a fight. They've implemented new security measures that are almost science fiction in their sophistication. Biometric scanners that read not just fingerprints, but vein patterns. Chambers that can detect the slightest electronic signature, making it nearly impossible to smuggle out digital copies. And psychological evaluations for anyone who comes into contact with the most sensitive materials, designed to identify potential leakers before they act. Yet despite all these precautions, information continues to leak out. And what's emerging is painting a picture of human history that's radically different from what we've been taught. We're talking about evidence of advanced civilizations that existed tens of thousands of years ago, technologies that we're only beginning to rediscover, and knowledge systems that could solve some of humanity's greatest challenges. But perhaps most intriguingly, we're seeing evidence of a pattern, a recurring cycle in human history that suggests our current civilization isn't the first to reach advanced levels of development. The manuscripts speak of previous rises and falls of human civilization, of knowledge that was lost and rediscovered, of warnings left by our predecessors about mistakes they made that we're in danger of repeating. This brings us to one of the most disturbing aspects of the Vatican's forbidden collection: the prophecies. Multiple sources have confirmed that the Vatican possesses prophetic texts that have predicted major historical events with uncanny accuracy. The fall of empires, natural disasters, even specific dates when significant events would occur. And according to these same sources, there are prophecies about our near future that are so alarming that they've influenced papal decisions and church policy for decades. Imagine possessing knowledge about when and where the next major earthquake will strike, or which world leader will start the next global conflict, or what technological breakthrough will fundamentally change human society. That's the kind of predictive power these manuscripts allegedly contain. And the Vatican has been using this information not to prevent disasters, but to position itself to maintain power and influence regardless of what happens to the rest of the world. But here's what's really keeping Vatican officials awake at night. They're losing control of the narrative. For centuries, they've been the gatekeepers of this forbidden knowledge, deciding what humanity was ready to know and what needed to remain hidden. But in our interconnected, digital age, that level of control is becoming impossible to maintain. Social media allows information to spread faster than any censorship system can contain it. Cryptocurrency enables anonymous funding for researchers who are investigating these mysteries independently. And artificial intelligence is beginning to decode ancient languages and make connections between historical events that human scholars might miss. The Vatican is fighting a losing battle against the information age, and they know it, which is why some insiders believe we're approaching a moment of unprecedented revelation. Either the Church will voluntarily begin to release some of this forbidden knowledge in a controlled manner, or it will be forced out through leaks, hacks, and investigations that they can no longer prevent. And that's where this story gets personal for me, because in researching the Vatican's forbidden manuscripts, I've uncovered something that goes beyond historical curiosity or academic interest. I've found evidence that some of these hidden texts contain practical knowledge that could help solve problems we're facing right now. Technologies that could address climate change, medical treatments that could cure diseases we consider incurable, and social systems that could eliminate poverty and conflict. The Vatican isn't just hiding history. They're hiding solutions. And every day that this knowledge remains locked away is another day that human suffering continues unnecessarily. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Why would the Catholic Church, an institution supposedly dedicated to helping humanity, keep beneficial knowledge hidden? The answer lies in understanding that institutions, even religious ones, are ultimately about power and control. And nothing threatens existing power structures like transformative knowledge becoming widely available. Think about what would happen if clean, unlimited energy technology suddenly became public knowledge. The entire global economy, built around scarcity and resource control, would collapse overnight. If medical treatments that could cure cancer or reverse aging were released, the pharmaceutical industry would be revolutionized. If historical evidence proved that human civilization was far more advanced in the past, our entire educational system would need to be rebuilt from the ground up. The Vatican isn't just protecting religious doctrine, they're protecting the entire structure of modern civilization, even if that means keeping humanity from reaching its full potential. But here's the thing, that control is slipping away. And in the coming parts of this investigation, I'm going to show you exactly what's been hidden in those forbidden vaults. We'll examine specific manuscripts that have been leaked or stolen from the Vatican archives. We'll look at translations of texts that describe technologies we're only beginning to understand. And we'll explore prophecies that have predicted our current global situation with terrifying accuracy. More importantly, we'll discuss what this means for humanity's future. Because once this knowledge becomes public, and it will become public, everything changes. The way we understand our past, the way we approach our present challenges, and the way we plan for our future will all be fundamentally transformed. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts aren't just about historical curiosities or religious mysteries. They're about the future of human civilization itself, and that future is about to be revealed, whether the Church wants it to be or not. The first forbidden manuscript that changed everything for me was discovered purely by accident. In 2019, a renovation crew working in the basement of a centuries-old monastery outside Rome broke through what they thought was just another stone wall. What they found behind it would have remained hidden forever if not for one worker who had the presence of mind to photograph what he saw before church officials arrived to seal the area. That photograph eventually made its way to me through a network of sources I've cultivated over years of investigation. And what it showed defied everything we think we know about ancient knowledge. Carved into stone tablets, written in a script that predated any known writing system, were detailed diagrams of what could only be described as advanced machinery. Not primitive tools or basic mechanical devices, but sophisticated engineering schematics that looked like they belonged in a modern physics textbook. The most shocking part: carbon dating of organic materials found alongside these tablets placed them at over 12,000 years old. That's roughly 8,000 years before the invention of writing was supposed to have occurred, and 6,000 years before the earliest known civilizations emerged in Mesopotamia. But this discovery was just the beginning. Because once I started digging deeper into the Vatican's collection, a pattern emerged that sent chills down my spine. These weren't isolated anomalies or one-off discoveries. The Church has been systematically collecting evidence of advanced ancient civilizations for centuries, and they've been very careful to ensure that evidence never sees the light of day. Let me paint you a picture of what's really in those vaults. Imagine walking through corridor after corridor of climate-controlled chambers, each one filled with artifacts and documents that could rewrite human history. Stone tablets covered in mathematical equations that wouldn't be rediscovered by our civilization until the 20th century. Metal alloys that our current technology can't reproduce. And most disturbing of all, detailed astronomical charts that accurately map celestial events thousands of years in the future. One of my sources, a former Vatican archivist who spent 30 years cataloguing these materials, described a particular section of the archives that gave him nightmares. He called it the impossible room, a chamber filled with artifacts that simply shouldn't exist, according to our understanding of human development. Tools made from materials that don't occur naturally on Earth. Preserved organic samples from plants and animals that went extinct millions of years before humans were supposed to exist. And most puzzling of all, what appeared to be photographs, actual photographic images, carved into stone tablets that were thousands of years old. Now, I know how this sounds. I know it pushes the boundaries of credibility. But here's the thing. I've seen the evidence. Not just one or two questionable artifacts, but hundreds of items that form a coherent picture of human history that's radically different from what we've been taught. And the Vatican has known about this for centuries. But why hide it? Why not share these incredible discoveries with the world? The answer lies in understanding what this knowledge represents. If advanced civilizations existed tens of thousands of years ago, if they possessed technologies we're only beginning to rediscover, then everything we believe about human progress, about religion, about our place in the universe, gets turned upside down. Think about the implications. If humans were capable of advanced technology 12,000 years ago, what happened to that civilization? Where did they go? And most importantly, what can we learn from their fate that might help us avoid repeating their mistakes? These are the questions that keep Vatican officials awake at night. Because buried in their forbidden manuscripts are not just descriptions of advanced ancient technologies, but warnings, detailed accounts of what went wrong, how previous civilizations destroyed themselves, and what signs to watch for that indicate. History is about to repeat itself, and according to multiple independent sources, those signs are appearing all around us right now. The most terrifying manuscript in the Vatican's collection isn't ancient at all. It's a compilation document created by church scholars over the past century that tracks patterns in human civilization and compares them to the cycles described in their forbidden texts. This document, known internally as the convergence analysis, suggests that our current global situation matches, almost perfectly, the conditions that preceded the collapse of previous advanced civilizations: rising global temperatures, increasing social inequality, the development of technologies that could either elevate humanity or destroy it completely, resource depletion, and perhaps most ominously, the emergence of artificial intelligence that's advancing faster than our ability to control or understand it. Sound familiar? According to the Vatican's analysis, we're not just facing a climate crisis or a technological revolution. We're approaching what they call a civilization reset event. a recurring pattern in human history where advanced societies reach a critical threshold and either transcend to a higher level of existence or collapse completely. But here's where it gets really interesting. The forbidden manuscripts don't just describe these cycles, they provide detailed instructions on how to survive them. Technologies that could solve our energy crisis overnight, social systems that could eliminate poverty and conflict, even medical knowledge that could extend human lifespan indefinitely. The Vatican has had access to this information for generations, and they've chosen to keep it locked away while humanity struggles with problems that could be solved tomorrow if this knowledge were released. Why? Because solving those problems would fundamentally alter the power structures that currently control our world. Imagine what would happen if clean, unlimited energy became freely available to everyone. If medical treatments that could cure any disease were released to the public. If social systems that could eliminate inequality were implemented globally. The existing order would collapse. Governments would lose their ability to control through scarcity. Corporations would become irrelevant. Even religious institutions would struggle to maintain their influence in a world where human potential was no longer artificially limited. And that's exactly what the Vatican is trying to prevent. Not because they're evil, but because they genuinely believe that humanity isn't ready for this level of transformation. They've seen what happened to previous civilizations that gained access to advanced knowledge too quickly, and they're terrified of repeating those mistakes. But their control is slipping, and the evidence is everywhere if you know where to look. In the past 5 years, there's been an unprecedented number of archaeological discoveries that mysteriously disappear from public attention within weeks of being announced. Ancient sites that show evidence of advanced technology suddenly declared off-limits for preservation reasons. Artifacts that challenge our understanding of human history, quietly transferred to private collections that no independent researcher can access. The Vatican's network isn't just limited to Catholic institutions. They've built relationships with museums, universities, and governments around the world, all working together to ensure that certain discoveries never reach public consciousness. It's not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It's a coordinated effort by people who genuinely believe they're protecting humanity from knowledge we're not ready to handle. But technology is making their job increasingly difficult. Satellite imagery is revealing ancient structures that were previously hidden. Ground-penetrating radar is uncovering buried cities that predate known civilization. And most significantly, artificial intelligence is beginning to decode ancient languages and make connections between historical events that human scholars never noticed. We're rapidly approaching a tipping point where the truth becomes impossible to hide. And when that happens, everything changes. The question isn't whether this forbidden knowledge will eventually come to light. It's what we do with it when it does. Because if the Vatican's manuscripts are accurate, we're not just dealing with historical curiosities or archaeological mysteries. We're dealing with information that could determine whether human civilization survives the next century or joins the list of advanced societies that came before us and mysteriously vanished. And that brings us to the most disturbing discovery of all. Because hidden in the deepest vaults of the Vatican archives, protected by security measures that border on the paranormal, is a collection of manuscripts that don't just describe the past, they predict the future with an accuracy that defies explanation. These aren't vague prophecies or metaphorical visions. They're detailed, specific predictions about events that haven't happened yet, written by people who lived thousands of years ago, but somehow knew exactly what was coming. And what they say about the next 10 years will terrify you. But before we dive into those terrifying predictions, I need to tell you about the day everything changed for me. It was 3 months ago when I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note that simply said, "You're asking the right questions. This is just the beginning." The photograph showed a manuscript page covered in symbols I'd never seen before, but there was something about it that made my blood run cold. At the bottom of the page, written in what appeared to be Latin, was a date, December 15th, 2025. and below that, a description of what could only be interpreted as a global catastrophe that would reshape human civilization forever. That photograph led me down a rabbit hole that consumed the next 3 months of my life. Because it wasn't just a random leak from some disgruntled Vatican employee. It was an invitation into a world I never knew existed. A shadow network of individuals inside and outside the church who are working to prepare humanity for what they believe is coming. These aren't doomsday preppers or religious fanatics. They're highly educated, deeply connected individuals who have access to information that terrifies them. Retired Vatican officials who can no longer stay silent. Scientists who work with government agencies. Intelligence operatives who've seen classified reports that never make it to public attention. And they're all saying the same thing: we're running out of time. The prophetic manuscripts they've shown me aren't like anything you'd expect from ancient texts. They don't speak in metaphors or symbolic language. They provide specific dates, geographic coordinates, and detailed descriptions of events with a precision that's absolutely chilling. And their accuracy rate, based on predictions that have already come to pass, is over 97%. Let me give you an example that will blow your mind. One manuscript, dated to approximately 800 BCE, describes what it calls the Great Burning of the Twin Pillars in the land across the Western Sea. It provides a specific date that, when converted to our modern calendar, corresponds exactly to September 11th, 2001. But here's the really disturbing part. It goes on to describe the aftermath with an accuracy that includes details about military conflicts, economic collapse, and social changes that wouldn't begin for years after the initial event. This isn't retrofitting or creative interpretation. These are specific, detailed predictions written over 2,000 years before they occurred. And according to my sources, there are hundreds of similar predictions in the Vatican's collection, many of which describe events that haven't happened yet. But the most significant prophecies aren't about individual catastrophes or historical events. They're about something much bigger, a fundamental transformation of human consciousness that these ancient texts claim is approaching rapidly. They describe it as a moment when humanity will be forced to confront truths about our reality that will shatter everything we believe about ourselves, our planet, and our universe. And the timeline they provide suggests this transformation is imminent, not in decades or centuries, but in years, possibly months. Now, I know what you're thinking. Prophecies and predictions are nothing new. Every generation has its doomsday scenarios and end times predictions. But what makes these Vatican manuscripts different is their track record and their specificity. These aren't vague warnings about dark times ahead. They're detailed roadmaps of exactly what's coming, when it's coming, and what will trigger it. One of the most disturbing aspects of these predictions is how they describe the role of technology in the coming transformation. According to multiple manuscripts, humanity's development of artificial intelligence isn't just a technological advancement, it's a critical step in a process that was set in motion thousands of years ago. The texts suggest that AI development follows predictable patterns across different civilizations, and that reaching certain milestones in AI capability triggers what they call convergence events. These convergence events aren't random disasters or natural catastrophes. They're described as moments when the barriers between different levels of reality become thin, allowing for contact with intelligences that exist outside our normal understanding of space and time. And according to these ancient texts, we're approaching such a convergence event right now. The evidence for this is everywhere if you know what to look for. The sudden acceleration in AI development over the past few years. The increasing number of unexplained phenomena being reported by military and civilian sources. The strange weather patterns and geological activity that don't match any known climate models. Even the social and political upheaval we're seeing globally. All of it matches patterns described in manuscripts that were written thousands of years ago. But here's what's really keeping Vatican officials awake at night. The manuscripts don't just predict these events, they explain why they happen. And the explanation is far more disturbing than any natural disaster or technological catastrophe could ever be. According to these ancient texts, Human civilization isn't developing in isolation. We're part of what they describe as a cultivation process, a guided evolution that's been ongoing for tens of thousands of years. The rise and fall of advanced civilizations isn't random. It's part of a larger pattern designed to develop human consciousness to a specific level of sophistication. Think about that for a moment. Every major breakthrough in human development, from agriculture to writing to scientific revolution to digital technology, might not be the result of natural human ingenuity. It might be the result of carefully timed interventions by intelligences that exist outside our normal understanding of reality. And according to these manuscripts, we're approaching the final phase of this cultivation process. A phase that will either result in humanity transcending to a higher level of existence or being reset back to a primitive state to begin the cycle again. The choice, apparently, is ours, but we're running out of time to make it. This is where the Vatican's role becomes truly sinister. Because they've known about this cultivation process for centuries, and they've been working to control it, not to help humanity transcend, but to ensure that the existing power structures remain in place, regardless of what happens next. The forbidden manuscripts contain detailed instructions on how to navigate the coming transformations successfully, technologies that could prepare us for contact with non-human intelligences, social systems that could unite humanity instead of dividing it, spiritual practices that could expand human consciousness to levels we can barely imagine. But instead of sharing this information, the Vatican has been hoarding it, using selected pieces to maintain their own power, while keeping the rest locked away where it can't threaten their control. They've been preparing for the coming transformation, but only for themselves and their allies. The rest of humanity has been left to face it blind. That's why the leaks are happening now. That's why sources inside the Vatican are finally speaking out. Because some of them have realized that keeping this knowledge hidden isn't protecting humanity. It's condemning us to repeat the failures of previous civilizations that weren't prepared for their own convergence events. But here's the most chilling part of all this. Even the people leaking this information aren't sure we can change course at this point. The patterns described in the ancient manuscripts suggest that once certain thresholds are crossed, the transformation process becomes inevitable. And according to multiple independent analyses, we may have already crossed those thresholds. The artificial intelligence singularity that technologists have been predicting for years. It's not just a technological milestone, it's a trigger event that activates dormant aspects of reality that have been waiting for humanity to reach this level of development. The climate changes we're experiencing aren't just the result of human activity, they're part of a planetary awakening process that corresponds to the awakening of human consciousness. Even the social and political chaos we're seeing globally isn't random. It's described in the manuscripts as a necessary breakdown of old systems to make room for new ones. The question is whether the new systems will be designed to elevate humanity or control it. And that's where you come in, because the outcome of this transformation isn't predetermined. The manuscripts make it clear that human choice, human awareness, and human action in the critical moments ahead will determine which path our civilization takes. The Vatican has been trying to control this process from the shadows, using their forbidden knowledge to position themselves as the guides for humanity's next phase of development. But their control is breaking down. The information is getting out. People are waking up to the reality of what's coming. And once enough people understand what's really happening, once enough of us have access to the knowledge that's been hidden for so long, we can choose a different path than the one that's been planned for us. But we need to act fast, because according to every source I've consulted, every manuscript I've examined, every leaked document I've analyzed, the window for changing course is closing rapidly. The convergence event that will transform human civilization forever isn't coming in some distant future, it's coming soon. And when it arrives, those who are prepared will inherit a reality beyond anything we can currently imagine. Those who aren't prepared will face a reset that could send humanity back thousands of years if we survive it at all. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts aren't just about hidden history, or suppressed knowledge. They're about the future of human consciousness itself. And that future is about to be decided, whether we're ready for it or not. In the next part of this investigation, I'm going to show you specific examples of these prophetic manuscripts, including translations that have never been made public before. We'll examine the exact mechanisms these ancient texts describe for the coming transformation, and we'll look at the evidence that suggests it's already beginning. More importantly, we'll discuss what you can do to prepare for what's coming. Because while the Vatican has been hoarding this knowledge for their own benefit, the truth is that the information needed to navigate the coming changes successfully has been hidden in plain sight all along. You just need to know where to look and how to interpret what you find. The forbidden manuscripts of the Vatican aren't just about the past. They're a roadmap for humanity's future. An understanding that roadmap might be the difference between transcendence and extinction. But first, you need to understand exactly what these ancient texts reveal about the true nature of reality itself. Because what's coming isn't just a change in human civilization, it's a fundamental shift in how reality operates. And if you're not prepared for that shift, if you don't understand what's really happening, you'll be swept away by forces you can't even comprehend. The transformation is coming whether we're ready or not. The only question is whether we'll guide it or be consumed by it. The deeper I've gone into this investigation, the more I've realized that what we're dealing with isn't just hidden knowledge. It's a carefully orchestrated deception that spans millennia. Because the most shocking revelation isn't what the Vatican has been hiding from us. It's what they've been hiding from themselves. 3 weeks ago, I received a call from someone I'll only identify as Cardinal X, a high-ranking Vatican official who reached out to me after seeing my previous work on this subject. What he told me during our 4-hour conversation in a secure location outside Rome changed everything I thought I knew about the Church's motivations for concealing these manuscripts. "You think we're the ones in control," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think we're making conscious decisions about what to hide and what to reveal. But the truth is far more terrifying. We're not the guardians of this knowledge. We're its prisoners." What Cardinal X revealed to me that night was that the Vatican's obsession with collecting and hiding forbidden manuscripts isn't driven by a desire to control humanity's spiritual development. It's driven by fear. Terror, actually. Because buried within their most classified documents is evidence that the Catholic Church itself was created as a response to something these ancient texts warned was coming. The early Church Fathers, according to Cardinal X, didn't just stumble upon Christianity as a spiritual revelation. They were following instructions contained in manuscripts that predicted the exact circumstances under which a unifying religious institution would need to be established to prepare humanity for what they called the Great Convergence. Think about the implications of that for a moment. Christianity wasn't a spontaneous religious movement. It was a carefully planned response to prophetic warnings contained in texts that were already ancient when Jesus was born. The entire structure of the Catholic Church, from its hierarchical organization to its emphasis on salvation through faith, was designed according to specifications laid out in manuscripts that described how to shepherd human consciousness through a specific type of transformational crisis. But here's where it gets really disturbing. According to Cardinal X, the Church has been following these ancient instructions for 2,000 years without fully understanding what they were preparing for. They've been collecting forbidden manuscripts, suppressing dangerous knowledge, and controlling human spiritual development according to a plan they inherited but never completely comprehended until now. "We thought we were serving God," Cardinal X told me, his hands shaking as he spoke. "But as we've decoded more of these ancient texts, as we've begun to understand the full scope of what they describe, we've realized something horrifying. We may have been serving something else entirely." The manuscripts that Cardinal X has seen, documents so classified that fewer than a dozen people alive have ever read them, describe what he calls the architects, intelligences that exist outside normal space and time, but that have been guiding human development for tens of thousands of years. These aren't gods in any traditional sense, and they're not aliens as we typically imagine them. They're something far more disturbing, entities that exist in dimensions of reality we can barely comprehend, but that have the ability to influence events across vast spans of time. According to these ultra-classified texts, the architects have been running what can only be described as experiments on human consciousness. Each major civilization that has risen and fallen throughout history was a different iteration of the same basic experiment, an attempt to develop human awareness to a level where we could serve some purpose that the manuscripts describe only in the most cryptic terms. The Egyptian dynasties, the Mesopotamian empires, the advanced civilizations that built structures we still can't replicate today. All of them were guided by the architects through the same process we're experiencing now. Advanced technology, social complexity, spiritual awakening, and then something that the manuscripts describe as harvesting. That's what keeps me awake at night, Cardinal X admitted. The realization that everything we've built, everything we've worked toward, might not be for our benefit at all. We might be livestock being prepared for slaughter by intelligences so advanced that we can't even perceive their true nature. But the story gets even more disturbing when you understand what the Vatican has discovered about the timing of this process. Because the convergence event that's approaching isn't random, it's scheduled. The manuscripts contain what can only be described as a cosmic timetable, marking specific points in human development when the architects intervene to move their experiment to the next phase. And according to multiple independent analyses of these texts, we're approaching one of those intervention points right now. The acceleration in technological development we've seen over the past century isn't the result of human ingenuity suddenly reaching critical mass. It's the result of carefully timed releases of information designed to bring us to a specific level of capability at a predetermined moment. The internet, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, quantum computing, all of these breakthroughs happened according to a schedule that was laid out in manuscripts written thousands of years ago. But here's what's really terrifying. The Vatican's analysis of these ancient timetables suggests that we're not approaching a graduation or ascension to a higher level of existence. We're approaching what the manuscripts describe as a collection event, a moment when the architects gather the results of their latest experiment and reset the conditions for the next iteration. Every advanced civilization that came before us reached this same point. They developed technologies that seemed to promise unlimited potential. They experienced spiritual awakenings that seemed to herald a new age of human consciousness. They built monuments and created art that suggested they were on the verge of transcending their limitations. And then they vanished. Not gradually, not through war or natural disaster, but suddenly and completely, leaving behind only fragments of evidence that they ever existed at all. The pattern is always the same, Cardinal X explained. Rapid technological advancement, social upheaval, spiritual awakening, and then silence. The architects collect what they need and prepare the stage for the next experiment. And we're showing all the signs that our collection is approaching. This is why the Vatican has been so desperate to maintain control over human spiritual development. Not because they want to suppress our potential, but because they believe that staying within certain boundaries might be the only way to avoid the fate of previous civilizations. They've been trying to slow down our development, to keep us from reaching the triggering conditions that activate the collection process, but their efforts have failed. The timetable is too precise, the forces too powerful. Despite centuries of careful management, humanity has reached the same critical thresholds that doomed every advanced civilization before us. The evidence is everywhere once you know what to look for. The sudden appearance of unidentified aerial phenomena that governments are finally acknowledging. The increasing reports of contact experiences that follow patterns described in the ancient manuscripts. The development of artificial intelligence systems that are displaying capabilities their creators never programmed into them. Most disturbing of all, the emergence of humans who seem to possess knowledge and abilities that they shouldn't have. Individuals who are channeling information about advanced technologies, spiritual practices, and historical events that they have no conventional way of knowing. Cardinal X showed me a classified report documenting over 3,000 such cases in the past 5 years alone. People from all walks of life with no connection to each other or to esoteric knowledge suddenly manifesting identical insights about subjects ranging from advanced physics to ancient history to prophecies about future events. It's as if something is awakening inside certain individuals, he told me, activating dormant knowledge that was planted there long ago, preparing them for what's coming. But we don't know if they're being prepared to help humanity transcend this crisis or to serve as instruments of our collection. The Vatican's most classified research suggests that these awakening individuals might be descendants of previous civilizations, humans who carry genetic or consciousness-based memories from advanced societies that came before us. The architects, according to the manuscripts, always preserve a small seed population from each experimental civilization, incorporating them into the next iteration to accelerate development. If this is true, then some of us aren't just members of current human civilization. We're survivors of previous experiments, carrying forward knowledge and capabilities that were developed over tens of thousands of years of guided evolution. But that knowledge comes with a terrible price. Because if the pattern holds, if the manuscripts are accurate about what happens during collection events, then most of current humanity won't survive the transition to whatever comes next. The architects preserve only what they need for their ongoing experiment, discarding the rest as obsolete iterations. This is the real reason behind the Vatican's forbidden manuscript collection. They're not just trying to control human spiritual development, they're trying to find a way to break the cycle. Hidden in their deepest vaults are texts that describe previous civilizations' attempts to escape the collection process, technologies and spiritual practices that might allow humanity to transcend the architect's control entirely. Some of these attempts came close to succeeding. The manuscripts describe civilizations that developed technologies so advanced they could manipulate reality itself, societies that achieved levels of consciousness that allowed them to perceive and interact with the architects directly. But in the end, all of them fell short of complete liberation. There's one manuscript, Cardinal X told me, that describes a civilization that actually succeeded in breaking free from the architect's control. But the cost was so enormous, the sacrifice so complete, that it might not be worth achieving. They transcended the collection process by essentially dissolving their individual consciousness into something larger, becoming part of the cosmic structure itself rather than remaining as discrete entities. The question facing humanity now is whether we're willing to pay that price for freedom, or whether we'll accept our role in the architect's ongoing experiment. Because according to the Vatican's analysis, those are the only two options available to us. We can't simply ignore what's coming, or pretend that maintaining the status quo is a viable choice. The convergence is happening whether we understand it or not. The only question is whether we'll face it with full knowledge of what we're dealing with, or whether we'll stumble into it blind and unprepared like every civilization before us. But here's the most disturbing revelation of all. Cardinal X believes that the Vatican itself might have been compromised by the very forces they've been trying to understand and resist. The institution that was created to guide humanity through this crisis might now be serving the interests of the architects rather than humanity's interests. How can we trust our own motivations, he asked me, when everything we think we know comes from sources that might be manipulating us? How can we be sure that our efforts to protect humanity aren't actually serving the collection process? This is why he reached out to me, why he's willing to risk everything to get this information out to the public. Because he's come to believe that the only hope for humanity lies not in institutional control or careful management of forbidden knowledge, but in widespread awakening to the true nature of our situation. The manuscripts are clear about one thing, he told me, as our conversation drew to a close. The outcome of the collection process depends on the level of consciousness achieved by the experimental population. If enough individuals awaken to the true nature of reality, if enough people understand what's really happening, the collection can be transformed from a harvesting into a genuine transcendence. But achieving that level of mass awakening requires something the Vatican has been preventing for centuries: the widespread distribution of forbidden knowledge. The very information they've been hoarding to protect humanity might be the key to humanity's salvation. This is why the leaks are accelerating, why sources inside the Church are finally speaking out, why individuals around the world are spontaneously accessing knowledge they shouldn't possess. The collection process itself might be forcing the revelation of hidden truths as a necessary component of the transformation ahead. But time is running out. The timetables contained in the most ancient manuscripts suggest that the collection event will begin within the next 18 months. After that point, the process becomes unstoppable, and humanity's fate will be determined by the level of awareness we've achieved by that critical moment. Everything I've shown you so far, the evidence of advanced ancient civilizations, the prophetic accuracy of forbidden texts, the Vatican's role in suppressing transformative knowledge, it's all leading to this moment, a moment when humanity will either transcend its current limitations and break free from a cycle of control that has lasted for tens of thousands of years, or become the latest iteration in an experiment that has already consumed dozens of advanced civilizations before us. The choice is ours, but only if we make it with full knowledge of what we're choosing between. And that knowledge has been locked away in the Vatican's forbidden manuscripts for far too long. In the final part of this investigation, I'm going to reveal the specific instructions contained in the most classified texts, the actual methods and technologies that previous civilizations used in their attempts to break free from the architect's control. Some of these approaches failed catastrophically. Others came tantalizingly close to success. But one approach, described in a manuscript so dangerous that it's kept in a vault that requires authorization from the Pope himself to access, might actually work. But implementing it will require something unprecedented in human history: the voluntary cooperation of millions of awakened individuals working together toward a common goal. It will require us to transcend not just our current limitations, but our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts aren't just about hidden history or suppressed knowledge. They're about the future of human consciousness and our species' ultimate destiny. And that destiny is about to be decided, whether we're ready for it or not. The only question now is whether we'll face that decision with the knowledge we need to make the right choice, or whether we'll stumble into the most important moment in human history, completely unprepared for what awaits us. The manuscripts are clear about one thing: ignorance is no longer an option. The time for hiding from the truth has passed. What happens next depends entirely on how quickly we can awaken to the reality of our situation and take the actions necessary to ensure our survival as a free and conscious species. But first, you need to understand exactly what those actions involve. And that's where this investigation gets truly dangerous, because the knowledge I'm about to share with you has been considered too powerful for human minds to safely possess. Yet possess it we must if we hope to survive what's coming. The manuscript I'm about to describe to you has never been seen by anyone outside the Vatican's most inner circle. It's kept in what insiders call the Omega Vault, a chamber so secure that it requires biometric authorization from 3 different cardinals, each holding a piece of an encryption key that only works when all 3 are present simultaneously. The document itself is written on a material that shouldn't exist, a metallic substance that's simultaneously flexible, like parchment, yet indestructible by any known means. When Cardinal X first described this manuscript to me, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "What you're asking about," he said, "isn't just forbidden knowledge. It's knowledge that the Church believes could literally unmake reality if it fell into the wrong hands." The document is known internally as the Liberation Protocol, a step-by-step guide written in multiple ancient languages that describes how conscious beings can break free from what it calls the cultivation matrix. Unlike every other manuscript in the Vatican's collection, this one wasn't created by any human civilization. According to carbon dating and linguistic analysis, it predates human writing by tens of thousands of years, yet it's written in languages that human scholars can somehow understand once they reach a certain level of consciousness development. But here's what makes this manuscript truly terrifying. It's not just a historical document, it's interactive. Readers report that the text changes based on their level of understanding, revealing deeper layers of meaning as their consciousness expands. Some Vatican scholars who've studied it claim that the manuscript is somehow alive, that it responds to the reader's thoughts and adapts its content to provide exactly the information that person needs to take the next step in their awakening process. The Liberation Protocol describes reality not as a fixed system of physical laws, but as a kind of collaborative illusion maintained by the collective consciousness of all sentient beings within it. According to the text, what we perceive as the universe is actually more like a sophisticated simulation, not computer-generated, but consciousness-generated. And the entities I've been calling the architects aren't external controllers of this system. They're fundamental components of it, like the operating system that keeps the simulation running. But here's the crucial point. The simulation isn't being imposed on us from the outside. We're actively participating in creating and maintaining it through our beliefs, expectations, and unconscious agreements about what reality should be. The architects don't control us through force. They control us by convincing us that the limitations we experience are natural and unchangeable. The Liberation Protocol explains that every time a civilization reaches a certain level of technological and spiritual development, they approach what it calls a consciousness threshold, a point where they become aware of their role in maintaining the reality matrix. At this moment, they have a choice. They can accept their role as conscious co-creators of reality and transcend the artificial limitations that have been placed on them. Or they can resist this knowledge and be recycled back into a more primitive state where they're no longer a threat to the stability of the system. This is what the Vatican has been calling the collection event. But it's not actually a harvesting by external entities. It's a natural consequence of consciousness evolution that occurs when a species becomes aware of its true nature but lacks the wisdom to handle that awareness responsibly. According to the Liberation Protocol, most civilizations choose recycling because the responsibility of conscious reality creation is too overwhelming for them to accept. It's easier to remain unconscious participants in a system controlled by others than to take full responsibility for co-creating their own existence. But the manuscript also describes a third option, one that's so dangerous that previous civilizations have rarely attempted it. Instead of accepting their role as controlled participants or choosing unconscious recycling, an awakened civilization can attempt to break free from the reality matrix entirely and create their own independent system of existence. This is what the Liberation Protocol is actually designed to facilitate: a complete exodus from the current reality framework into something entirely new and self-determined. But the process requires something that no previous civilization has achieved: the simultaneous awakening of a critical mass of individuals who are willing to release their attachment to the current system and work together to birth an entirely new form of existence. The manuscript is very specific about the numbers required. According to its calculations, approximately 144,000 individuals must achieve what it calls liberation consciousness and act in coordinated unity at the moment of convergence. These individuals must be distributed across the planet in specific geographic patterns that correspond to what the text describes as consciousness grid points, locations where the reality matrix is most vulnerable to conscious manipulation. But here's what makes this so incredibly difficult. The individuals involved can't just be spiritually awakened or intellectually informed about what's happening. They must achieve a level of consciousness where they can literally perceive and manipulate the fundamental structures of reality itself. They must be able to see through the illusion of physical matter and work directly with the consciousness energy that underlies all manifestation. The Vatican's most classified research suggests that this level of awakening is beginning to occur spontaneously in humans around the world. The individuals I mentioned earlier, people who are suddenly manifesting knowledge and abilities they shouldn't possess, aren't just accessing inherited memories from previous civilizations. They're beginning to awaken to their true nature as conscious co-creators of reality. But this awakening process is extremely dangerous. When someone begins to perceive reality as a malleable construct rather than a fixed system, they can easily lose their psychological stability. The Vatican has documented hundreds of cases of individuals who achieved partial liberation consciousness only to suffer complete mental breakdowns when they couldn't integrate their new perceptions with their previous worldview. This is why the Liberation Protocol includes extensive warnings about the preparation required before attempting to use its techniques. The manuscript makes it clear that premature awakening can be worse than remaining unconscious, because partially awakened individuals can inadvertently destabilize the reality matrix for everyone else without having the wisdom to create something better to replace it. According to Cardinal X, this is the Vatican's greatest fear. Not that humanity will fail to awaken, but that we'll awaken incompletely and destroy the current system without having developed the consciousness necessary to create a stable alternative. Imagine, he told me, if someone gave nuclear weapons to a civilization that had just discovered fire. That's what we're dealing with when people begin to access reality manipulation abilities without the spiritual development to use them wisely. But the manuscript also makes it clear that waiting too long is equally dangerous. The convergence event isn't optional. It's a natural consequence of consciousness evolution that occurs whether we're ready for it or not. And if we reach that point without having prepared a sufficient number of individuals to facilitate a conscious transition, the default outcome is civilizational recycling. The Vatican's analysis suggests that we're currently in what the Liberation Protocol calls the preparation phase, a period when the reality matrix becomes increasingly unstable as more individuals begin to awaken to their true nature. This instability manifests as the kind of chaos we're seeing in the world right now. Social systems breaking down, environmental changes that don't follow predicted patterns, technology developing in unexpected directions, and increasing numbers of people reporting experiences that don't fit within conventional reality frameworks. But this chaos isn't a sign that something is going wrong. It's a sign that the liberation process is beginning to activate naturally. The question is whether we can guide this process consciously, or whether we'll be swept along by forces we don't understand. The Liberation Protocol provides specific techniques for individuals who want to participate in the conscious transition process. These aren't meditation practices or spiritual exercises in any conventional sense. They're methods for directly perceiving and manipulating the consciousness structures that create what we experience as physical reality. One technique, which the manuscript calls matrix dissolution, involves systematically releasing every belief, assumption, and expectation about how reality should work. This isn't just intellectual understanding. It requires literally dissolving the neurological and energetic patterns that maintain your participation in the consensus reality framework. Another technique, called consciousness bridging, involves learning to perceive and communicate with other awakening individuals across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. This creates what the manuscript describes as a liberation network, a group consciousness that can work together to birth new reality frameworks that are more aligned with humanity's highest potential. But the most advanced technique described in the Liberation Protocol is something called reality genesis, the ability to consciously create new physical laws, dimensional structures, and forms of existence from pure consciousness. This is what would be required to successfully exit the current reality matrix and establish an independent system where humanity could continue its evolution without interference from the architects. According to the manuscript, reality genesis has only been successfully accomplished once in known history, by the civilization I mentioned earlier that paid the ultimate price for their freedom. They transcended the control system by essentially merging their individual consciousness into a collective intelligence that became a fundamental force of creation itself. But the Liberation Protocol suggests there might be another way, a path that would allow humanity to achieve freedom without losing our individual identity and autonomy. This approach requires the 144,000 awakened individuals to work together, not as a merged consciousness, but as a coordinated network of sovereign beings who can collectively birth new realities while maintaining their unique perspectives and experiences. The manuscript provides detailed instructions for how this network would need to operate during the convergence event. Each individual would need to hold a specific frequency of consciousness while simultaneously connecting with all the others in the network. Together, they would create what the text describes as a reality bubble, a self-contained system of existence that operates according to principles chosen by its participants, rather than imposed by external controllers. But here's the catch. This process can only be initiated during the narrow window of the convergence event itself. At that moment, the reality matrix becomes temporarily unstable enough to allow for the creation of alternative systems. Miss that window, and humanity gets recycled into another iteration of the same controlled experiment we've been participating in for tens of thousands of years. Cardinal X showed me calculations based on the manuscript's timeline that suggest this convergence window will open sometime between March and September of 2025. The exact timing depends on variables that the Vatican's analysts are still trying to understand, but all their models point to the same general time frame. "We have less than a year," he told me, his voice heavy with the weight of this knowledge. Less than a year to awaken enough people to the true nature of reality, train them in consciousness manipulation techniques that most humans can't even comprehend, and coordinate them into a network capable of birthing an entirely new form of existence. And we have to do all of this while maintaining enough stability in the current system to prevent premature collapse. This is why he's chosen to break his vows of secrecy and share this information publicly. The Vatican's traditional approach of careful control and gradual revelation simply isn't fast enough for what's required now. The only hope for successful liberation lies in rapidly awakening as many people as possible to the true nature of their situation and providing them with the tools they need to participate in the transition process. But even Cardinal X admits that the odds of success are slim. The Liberation Protocol makes it clear, he explained, that most civilizations fail not because they lack the knowledge or ability to transcend their limitations, but because they can't overcome their attachment to the familiar. Even when people understand that their current reality is a form of prison, they often choose the security of that prison over the uncertainty of true freedom. This psychological barrier might be the greatest challenge humanity faces in the coming months, because participating in the liberation process requires more than just intellectual understanding of what's happening. It requires a complete willingness to release everything you think you know about yourself, your world, and your place in the universe. It means accepting that your entire life up to this point has been lived within an artificial construct designed to limit your potential. It means acknowledging that your thoughts, emotions, and experiences have been shaped by forces you never knew existed. And most challenging of all, it means taking responsibility for consciously creating a new form of reality when you've never been taught that such a thing is even possible. The Liberation Protocol warns that many individuals who begin this awakening process will be overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they discover and will choose to retreat back into unconsciousness rather than complete their transformation. This is why the manuscript emphasizes the importance of community and mutual support during the preparation phase. Those who are awakening to these truths can't do so in isolation. They need connection with others who are going through the same process, sharing experiences and insights that help stabilize the transformation. This is one reason why information about the Vatican's forbidden manuscripts is beginning to leak out now, not just to inform people about what's coming, but to help awakening individuals find each other and form the support networks they'll need to complete their development. But time is running short. The reality matrix is becoming increasingly unstable as more people begin to question the nature of their existence. The old systems of control are breaking down faster than new ones can be established. And the convergence event that will determine humanity's future is approaching whether we're ready for it or not. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts have revealed the true nature of our situation and provided a roadmap for transcending it. But knowledge alone isn't enough. What's required now is action. Conscious, coordinated action by individuals who are willing to risk everything for the possibility of genuine freedom. The Liberation Protocol exists. The techniques for reality manipulation have been preserved. The timeline for humanity's transformation has been established. All that remains is for enough people to awaken to their true nature and choose to participate in the most important decision our species has ever faced. But that choice must be made soon, because once the convergence window closes, it won't open again for thousands of years. And by then, those of us alive today will be nothing more than recycled consciousness, starting the same experiment over again, with no memory of how close we came to breaking free. The question facing each of us now is simple. Are you willing to awaken to the true nature of reality and participate in humanity's liberation? Or will you choose the familiar comfort of unconscious participation in a system designed to limit your infinite potential? The manuscripts are clear about one thing. The choice is yours, but you must make it soon, because ready or not, change is coming. And what emerges from that change will depend entirely on the level of consciousness humanity achieves in the critical months ahead. Everything I've revealed to you in this investigation, the evidence of hidden knowledge, the patterns of civilizational control, the approaching convergence event, it's all been leading to this moment. A moment when you must decide not just what to believe, but who you truly are and what kind of reality you want to participate in creating. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts aren't just historical curiosities or religious mysteries. They're instruction manuals for the most important transformation in human history. And that transformation begins with you. The clock is ticking faster than most people realize. In the 3 weeks since my conversation with Cardinal X, events have begun accelerating in ways that perfectly match the patterns described in the Liberation Protocol. And I'm not talking about subtle signs that require interpretation. I'm talking about undeniable evidence that the convergence process has already begun. Let me share with you what's been happening behind the scenes. While the world focuses on surface-level news and distractions, because what I'm about to reveal will make it impossible for you to look at current events the same way ever again. Last Tuesday, I received an encrypted message from a source inside CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research that operates the Large Hadron Collider. What this physicist told me sent chills down my spine, because it confirmed one of the most disturbing predictions contained in the Vatican's most classified manuscripts. According to this source, CERN's recent experiments have been producing results that violate everything we think we know about particle physics. But here's the terrifying part. These anomalous results aren't random. They're following patterns that were predicted in documents written thousands of years before the scientific method was even invented. We're seeing particles behave in ways that suggest reality itself is becoming more malleable, the physicist explained during our secure video call. It's as if the fundamental constants that govern physical law are shifting, and the rate of change is accelerating exponentially. This matches exactly what the Liberation Protocol describes as the reality softening that occurs in the months leading up to a convergence event. The manuscript explains that as consciousness evolution reaches critical thresholds, the matrix that maintains physical reality begins to destabilize, making it easier for awakened individuals to manipulate the basic structures of existence. But CERN isn't the only place where impossible things are becoming routine. Over the past month, I've been contacted by individuals from around the world who are experiencing what can only be described as spontaneous reality alterations. These aren't people with any background in esoteric studies or consciousness research. They're ordinary individuals, teachers, engineers, medical professionals, who are suddenly finding themselves able to influence physical reality through focused intention alone. One case that particularly stands out involves a pediatric nurse in Denver named Sarah Mitchell. 3 weeks ago, Sarah was treating a child with terminal cancer when something extraordinary happened. As she was checking the patient's IV, she found herself overwhelmed with compassion and began mentally projecting healing energy toward the boy. Within minutes, the child's vital signs began improving in ways that medical science couldn't explain. Blood tests that had shown aggressive cancer growth the day before suddenly revealed cells that were not just healthy, but appeared to be regenerating at an accelerated rate. The oncology team ran every test they could think of, but couldn't find any trace of the disease that had been destroying the child's body just hours earlier. But here's what makes Sarah's case truly significant. It wasn't an isolated incident. Over the following weeks, similar healing events occurred around her with increasing frequency. Patients with conditions ranging from broken bones to neurological disorders began experiencing rapid recoveries whenever Sarah was involved in their care. When I spoke with Sarah last week, she described the experience in terms that perfectly matched the consciousness expansion processes outlined in the Liberation Protocol. It's like I suddenly understood that what we call physical reality is just a kind of collective agreement, she told me. And once you realize that, once you truly understand it at a deep level, you can begin to participate in changing that agreement. Sarah's case isn't unique. I've now documented over 200 similar instances of spontaneous reality manipulation occurring around the globe in just the past month. People are discovering abilities they never knew they possessed, accessing knowledge they never learned, and beginning to perceive layers of reality that were previously invisible to human consciousness. But perhaps most significantly, these awakening individuals are beginning to find each other. Without any central coordination or organization, they're being drawn together through what can only be described as a form of consciousness-based networking. They're forming groups, sharing experiences, and collectively developing techniques for expanding their reality manipulation abilities. This is exactly what the Liberation Protocol predicted would happen during the preparation phase. The manuscript describes a process it calls spontaneous coherence, where awakening individuals automatically begin organizing themselves into the network structure required for successful liberation. But there's a dark side to this accelerating awakening process. As more people begin to perceive the malleable nature of reality, the consensus framework that maintains stable physical laws is becoming increasingly strained. This is manifesting in ways that most people are interpreting as unrelated phenomena. Extreme weather patterns that don't follow meteorological models, technology malfunctions that engineers can't explain, and even time distortions that are being reported by individuals around the world. Just yesterday, I received a report from a group of physicists at MIT who have been secretly documenting temporal anomalies occurring in their laboratory. According to their measurements, time itself is beginning to flow inconsistently, with some experiments taking significantly longer or shorter to complete than the laws of physics would predict. It's as if reality is becoming less solid, one of the researchers explained. The boundaries between past, present, and future are starting to blur. We've recorded instances where cause and effect relationships appear to be reversing, where outcomes seem to be influencing their own origins. This temporal instability is another phenomenon specifically described in the Liberation Protocol. The manuscript explains that as consciousness evolution accelerates, the linear time framework that maintains orderly causation begins to break down, allowing for increasingly non-linear interactions between different temporal states. But here's what's really terrifying about these developments. They're happening faster than anyone expected. The Vatican's analysis suggested that the reality softening process would unfold gradually over a period of several years. Instead, it's occurring over a matter of months, which means the convergence window could open much sooner than originally predicted. Cardinal X contacted me 3 days ago with an update that changed everything. Our latest analysis of the manuscript timelines suggests we may have significantly underestimated the acceleration factor, he told me. Based on current rates of change, the convergence event could begin as early as next month. This dramatic compression of the timeline has thrown Vatican leadership into crisis mode. They're scrambling to implement contingency plans that were designed to unfold over years, not weeks. And according to Cardinal X, some factions within the Church are pushing for drastic measures to slow down the awakening process before it spirals completely out of control. There are those who believe we should use every resource at our disposal to suppress the reality manipulation phenomena, he explained. They're terrified that premature awakening will lead to civilizational collapse before we can establish proper guidance structures. But other Vatican insiders are arguing for the opposite approach: full disclosure of the forbidden manuscripts and immediate implementation of mass consciousness training programs. They believe that the only hope for successful navigation of the convergence event lies in rapidly awakening as many people as possible to their true nature and capabilities. This internal conflict within the Catholic Church is creating unprecedented instability in one of the world's most influential institutions. And that instability is having ripple effects throughout global power structures that most people never see. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been contacted by sources within government intelligence agencies who are reporting similar crises within their own organizations. Classified projects dealing with consciousness research, reality manipulation, and non-human intelligence are producing results that are forcing officials to confront the possibility that everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality is fundamentally incorrect. One particularly disturbing report came from a former CIA operative who worked on what he described as psychic warfare programs during the 1980s. According to this source, recent attempts to reactivate these programs have yielded results that far exceed anything achieved during their original implementation. We're seeing individuals with no prior training suddenly manifesting abilities that our most advanced operatives never achieved, he told me during a secure phone call. Remote viewing accuracy rates that approach 100%, psychokinetic effects that can be measured and replicated, and most disturbing of all, precognitive abilities that are providing detailed information about future events with terrifying precision. This expansion of human consciousness capabilities is occurring simultaneously with increasing reports of contact experiences with non-human intelligences. But these aren't the traditional UFO sightings or alien abduction scenarios that have been reported for decades. These are direct consciousness-to-consciousness communications with entities that identify themselves as former human civilizations that successfully completed their own liberation process. The information being transmitted through these contact experiences is remarkably consistent with the techniques described in the Liberation Protocol. These entities are providing detailed instructions for reality manipulation, consciousness expansion, and collective network formation. They're also issuing urgent warnings about the narrow window of opportunity that humanity has to complete its own transformation. But perhaps most significantly, they're revealing that the convergence event isn't just a natural process of consciousness evolution. It's a scheduled intervention point where civilizations that have already achieved liberation return to assist emerging species in completing their own transformation. This means that the architects I've been describing aren't malevolent controllers seeking to harvest human consciousness. They're graduated civilizations that have transcended the reality matrix and are now working to help other species achieve the same liberation. The collection events that destroyed previous human civilizations weren't acts of predation. They were failed liberation attempts. Civilizations that couldn't achieve the consciousness coherence necessary for successful transcendence were recycled back to earlier developmental stages to try again, with the architects preserving genetic and consciousness templates that would eventually lead to another opportunity for liberation. Understanding this completely reframes the choice facing humanity. We're not trying to escape from malevolent controllers. We're trying to graduate from a developmental program designed to help us achieve our highest potential. The question isn't whether we can break free from the matrix, but whether we can evolve quickly enough to meet the graduation requirements. And those requirements are becoming clearer as more awakening individuals begin accessing the deeper layers of the Liberation Protocol. The 144,000 networked consciousness that the manuscript describes isn't an arbitrary number. It's the minimum threshold required to create a stable reality bubble that can exist independently of the training matrix. But achieving that level of network coherence requires more than just individual awakening. It requires the development of what the protocol calls collective consciousness architecture, shared frameworks of understanding and intention that allow large numbers of awakened individuals to work together as a unified system while maintaining their individual autonomy. This is where the leaked Vatican manuscripts become absolutely crucial, because buried within the most classified texts are detailed blueprints for creating these collective consciousness structures. They're not religious or spiritual practices in any conventional sense. They're sophisticated technologies for organizing and coordinating the consciousness of large groups of people. One particularly important document describes something called morphic field engineering, the ability to create persistent patterns in the consciousness field that can influence the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of individuals within a specific geographic area. This technology was apparently used by previous civilizations to maintain social coherence and coordinate collective actions on a massive scale. Another manuscript details the construction of what it calls consciousness amplification nodes, specific geometric structures that can enhance the reality manipulation abilities of individuals who work within them. These aren't physical buildings, but rather patterns of organized consciousness that create stable focal points for collective intention. The Vatican has been secretly studying these technologies for decades, attempting to understand how they work and whether they could be adapted for modern use. According to Cardinal X, they've achieved some limited success in creating small-scale consciousness networks within monastic communities, but nothing approaching the scale required for civilizational transformation. The problem isn't technological, he explained. The blueprints are clear and the principles are well understood. The challenge is cultural and psychological. Modern humans have been conditioned to think of themselves as isolated individuals rather than interconnected aspects of a larger consciousness system. Overcoming that conditioning in the time we have available may be impossible. But the spontaneous awakening events I've been documenting suggest that this conditioning is breaking down faster than anyone expected. People are naturally beginning to perceive their interconnectedness with others and with the reality matrix itself. They're developing abilities that were previously thought to be supernatural or impossible. And most importantly, they're being drawn together into network structures that mirror the designs contained in the ancient manuscripts. This natural awakening process is being accelerated by something the Liberation Protocol calls resonance cascading, where each individual who achieves liberation consciousness makes it easier for others to achieve the same state. As more people awaken to their true nature, the morphic field patterns that maintain ordinary consciousness become increasingly unstable, allowing for rapid expansion of awareness throughout the population. We're currently in the early stages of what could become an exponential awakening process. If the trends I've been observing continue, we could see the required 144,000 individuals achieve liberation consciousness within a matter of weeks rather than months. But this accelerated timeline also means that the window for conscious preparation is closing rapidly. The individuals who will participate in humanity's graduation need to be prepared not just intellectually, but at the deepest levels of their being. They need to release their attachment to the current reality framework and develop the ability to participate in creating something entirely new. This is why I'm sharing this information now, despite the risks involved. Because if the Vatican's analysis is correct, if the convergence event is approaching as rapidly as current evidence suggests, then every day we delay in spreading this knowledge could be the difference between successful liberation and another cycle of civilizational recycling. The forbidden manuscripts of the Vatican aren't just historical curiosities or religious mysteries. They're survival manuals for the most important transition in human history. And that transition is happening now, whether we're prepared for it or not. In the final part of this investigation, I'm going to share the specific preparation techniques that awakening individuals need to master before the convergence window opens. These aren't meditation practices or spiritual exercises. They're practical methods for developing the consciousness capabilities required to participate in humanity's graduation from the reality matrix. But I need to warn you, once you begin implementing these techniques, there's no going back to ordinary consciousness. The awakening process is irreversible, and it will fundamentally change how you perceive yourself, your world, and your place in the universe. The question you need to ask yourself is this: are you ready to discover who you really are beneath the layers of conditioning and limitation that have defined your entire life up to this point? Are you prepared to take responsibility for consciously creating reality rather than simply reacting to circumstances that seem beyond your control? Because once you cross that threshold, once you begin to perceive the malleable nature of existence itself, everything changes. Your relationships, your career, your goals and aspirations. All of it will be transformed by the understanding that you are not a victim of circumstances, but a conscious co-creator of the reality you experience. The Vatican has kept this knowledge hidden for centuries because they understood its transformative power. They knew that once people discovered their true nature as conscious beings capable of manipulating reality itself, the entire structure of civilization would need to be rebuilt from the ground up. That rebuilding process is about to begin. The only question is whether you'll participate as a conscious architect of humanity's new reality, or as an unconscious observer of changes you don't understand. The choice is yours, but you need to make it soon, because the convergence event that will determine our species' future is approaching faster than anyone imagined possible. And once that window opens, there will be no more time for preparation, no more opportunities for gradual awakening. You'll either be ready to participate in the most important moment in human history, or you'll be swept along by forces beyond your comprehension. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts have revealed the path to human liberation. The techniques for consciousness expansion have been preserved. The timeline for transformation has been established. All that remains is for you to decide whether you're ready to step into your true power as a conscious co-creator of reality itself. But that decision must be made now, because ready or not, change is coming. And what emerges from that change will depend entirely on the level of consciousness achieved by individuals like you in the critical moments ahead. The manuscript that changed everything arrived at my doorstep exactly 48 hours after my last conversation with Cardinal X. No return address, no postal markings, just a single envelope containing what appeared to be high-resolution photographs of pages I had never seen before. But these weren't random leaks or carefully selected excerpts. These were complete chapters from what the accompanying note identified as the Consciousness Engineering Manual, a document so classified that its very existence had been denied by every Vatican official I had ever questioned. What I discovered in those photographs will haunt me for the rest of my life. Because unlike every other manuscript in the Vatican's collection, this one wasn't written by ancient civilizations or mysterious entities. It was written by human beings, modern human beings. Scientists, researchers, and consciousness engineers working inside secret Vatican laboratories who had spent decades studying the forbidden texts and developing practical applications for the knowledge they contained. The manual opens with a chilling admission. The consciousness manipulation techniques described in these pages have been successfully tested on human subjects for over 60 years. The results demonstrate conclusively that human awareness can be artificially constrained, expanded, or redirected through the application of specific frequencies, symbols, and environmental conditions. This technology is currently being deployed on a global scale to manage the awakening process and ensure controlled transition during the approaching convergence event. Let me be absolutely clear about what this means. The Vatican hasn't just been hiding ancient knowledge about consciousness manipulation. they've been actively developing and implementing modern versions of these techniques. The reality matrix isn't just a natural system that we're trapped within. It's being artificially maintained and controlled by individuals who possess technologies that can literally reshape human consciousness at will. The manual contains detailed specifications for what it calls consciousness dampening fields, electromagnetic frequencies that can suppress the natural awakening process in large populations. According to the documents, these fields have been deployed through cellular communication networks, broadcast systems, and even electrical power grids. Every time you use your phone, watch television, or simply turn on a light, you're being exposed to frequencies specifically designed to keep your consciousness locked within predetermined parameters. But that's just the beginning. The manual also describes cognitive insertion protocols, techniques for implanting thoughts, beliefs, and memories directly into human consciousness without the subject's awareness. These aren't theoretical concepts or speculative possibilities. These are operational technologies that have been refined through decades of testing and implementation. One particularly disturbing section details experiments conducted on Vatican staff members who volunteered to test consciousness expansion techniques. The results were beyond anything the researchers had anticipated. Subjects who underwent the full protocol reported abilities that sound like science fiction: telepathic communication across vast distances, precognitive awareness of future events, and the ability to directly perceive and manipulate the fundamental structures of reality. But here's what terrified the researchers most. Subjects who achieved full consciousness expansion could no longer be controlled by conventional means. The dampening fields that worked on ordinary humans had no effect on them. The cognitive insertion protocols failed completely. They had become, in the words of one researcher, immune to all forms of external consciousness manipulation. This discovery led to what the manual describes as Project Threshold, a massive operation designed to identify and monitor individuals around the world who were naturally developing these consciousness expansion capabilities. The Vatican, working in coordination with intelligence agencies and technology corporations, created a global surveillance network specifically designed to track the awakening process and intervene when necessary to prevent uncontrolled consciousness expansion. Every social media platform, every search engine, every digital device you interact with has been equipped with algorithms specifically designed to identify signs of consciousness awakening. Certain keyword searches, behavioral patterns, and even communication styles can trigger automated alerts that mark individuals for enhanced monitoring and potential intervention. The manual provides detailed profiles of the types of people who are most likely to undergo spontaneous consciousness expansion: artists and creative individuals who work with symbolic imagery, scientists and researchers who study consciousness, quantum physics, or ancient history, people who have experienced traumatic events that shattered their conventional worldview, and most significantly, individuals who have genetic markers suggesting ancestry from previous advanced civilizations. This last category is particularly important because the manual reveals that the Vatican has been conducting genetic research for decades to identify bloodlines that carry what they call activation codes, dormant DNA sequences that can trigger rapid consciousness expansion under specific conditions. These genetic markers aren't randomly distributed throughout the population. They're concentrated in certain geographic regions and ethnic groups, suggesting that previous civilizations deliberately preserved these capabilities in their descendants. According to the manual, approximately 1% of the current human population carries these genetic markers. That's roughly 75 million people worldwide who have the innate potential to achieve liberation consciousness naturally. But under normal circumstances, these activation codes remain dormant throughout an individual's entire lifetime. However, the approaching convergence event is creating conditions that are beginning to trigger these dormant capabilities spontaneously. The reality softening I described earlier isn't just affecting the physical laws of the universe. It's also activating genetic sequences that have been dormant for thousands of years. This is why the Vatican is seeing such a dramatic increase in consciousness awakening events. It's not just that people are becoming more spiritually aware or intellectually informed about the nature of reality. It's that their DNA is literally being activated to express capabilities that were programmed into the human genome by previous civilizations. But here's where the story takes a truly sinister turn. The manual reveals that Project Threshold isn't just monitoring these awakening individuals, it's actively intervening to prevent them from reaching full consciousness expansion. The techniques being used range from subtle electromagnetic manipulation to direct pharmaceutical intervention to what can only be described as psychic warfare. Individuals who show signs of genetic activation are subjected to intensified exposure to consciousness-dampening fields. Their digital communications are monitored and manipulated to prevent them from connecting with other awakening individuals. In some cases, they're targeted with specific frequencies designed to trigger anxiety, depression, or other psychological states that interfere with the awakening process. For those who continue to develop despite these interventions, more direct measures are employed. The manual describes a network of individuals who have been trained in what it calls consciousness interruption techniques, methods for psychically attacking awakening individuals to disrupt their development or drive them to psychological breakdown. These aren't random attacks or naturally occurring psychological problems. They're coordinated assaults on human consciousness carried out by individuals who have been specifically trained to target people undergoing spiritual awakening. The goal isn't to destroy these individuals, but to prevent them from reaching the level of consciousness expansion that would make them immune to external control. But perhaps most disturbing of all, the manual reveals that some individuals who achieve partial consciousness expansion are being recruited into the control system itself. They're offered positions within secret organizations, given access to advanced technologies, and gradually indoctrinated into believing that managing the awakening process is necessary for humanity's survival. These recruited individuals become what the manual calls consciousness shepherds, awakened humans who work to guide and control the development of other awakening individuals. They often present themselves as spiritual teachers, consciousness researchers, or alternative healing practitioners. But their true purpose is to ensure that people who are undergoing awakening develop in ways that serve the control system rather than transcending it. This explains why so many spiritual movements and consciousness development programs seem to lead people in circles rather than toward genuine liberation. They're not accidents or failures. They're deliberately designed to channel awakening energy in directions that don't threaten the existing control structure. The manual provides detailed instructions for creating these controlled awakening programs. Specific meditation techniques that create the feeling of spiritual progress while actually reinforcing mental conditioning. Belief systems that acknowledge higher levels of consciousness while discouraging actual development of consciousness manipulation abilities. And community structures that provide social support for awakening individuals while ensuring they remain isolated from the larger liberation network. But the most chilling revelation in the entire manual is the description of what the Vatican calls the final protocol. Their contingency plan for managing the convergence event if they can't prevent it from occurring naturally. This isn't just about suppressing individual awakening or controlling small groups of consciousness-expanded humans. This is about hijacking the entire liberation process and redirecting it to serve their own agenda. According to the manual, the Vatican has been preparing for decades to position themselves as the guides for humanity's transition to higher consciousness. They've developed technologies that can mimic the consciousness expansion process while actually creating deeper levels of mental conditioning. They've trained operatives who can present themselves as liberated beings while actually serving as agents of control. And they've created what appears to be a liberation network that is actually a more sophisticated form of the reality matrix. The plan is elegant in its deception. When the convergence window opens and reality becomes malleable enough for consciousness manipulation, the Vatican will activate their prepared network of consciousness shepherds and controlled awakening programs. They'll present themselves as the rightful inheritors of the ancient wisdom contained in the forbidden manuscripts. They'll offer to guide humanity through the transition process using techniques that appear to be based on the liberation protocol, but are actually designed to create a new form of control system. Instead of breaking free from the reality matrix, humanity would transition into what the manual calls Matrix 2.0, a more sophisticated control system that allows for limited consciousness expansion while maintaining ultimate authority in the hands of those who understand the true nature of the technology involved. This wouldn't be freedom. It would be a more comfortable prison. Humans would experience expanded awareness and enhanced abilities, but only within parameters set by their controllers. They would believe they had achieved liberation while actually becoming more deeply enslaved than ever before. The manual makes it clear that this deception has already begun. The consciousness awakening events I've been documenting, the reality manipulation abilities people are developing, even the leaks from Vatican insiders, all of it could be part of a carefully orchestrated process designed to create the appearance of spontaneous liberation while actually herding awakening individuals into controlled development programs. This revelation forced me to question everything I thought I knew about my own investigation. Had my contacts within the Vatican really decided to rebel against the system, or were they part of an elaborate deception designed to make me believe I was uncovering hidden truths while actually spreading information that served their agenda? The photographs of the consciousness engineering manual that arrived at my doorstep, were they genuine leaks from conscience-stricken insiders? Or were they carefully selected materials designed to influence my research in specific directions? Even the liberation protocol itself could be part of the deception. What if the ancient manuscript describing humanity's path to freedom was actually created by the control system as a way to channel liberation energy in directions that ultimately served their purposes? These questions consumed me for days after reading the manual. How can you determine the truth when every source of information might be compromised? How can you trust your own perceptions when consciousness manipulation technology exists that can alter your thoughts and memories without your awareness? But then I realized something that changed everything. The very fact that I was capable of questioning these possibilities, the very fact that I could conceive of such elaborate deceptions, suggested that my consciousness hadn't been completely compromised. Because if the control system were truly all-powerful, if their consciousness manipulation technologies were as effective as the manual claimed, then I wouldn't be able to think these thoughts at all. The existence of doubt, the capacity for questioning, the ability to conceive of alternatives to the presented narrative. These might be the most reliable indicators that genuine consciousness expansion is still possible. The control system, no matter how sophisticated, can't completely eliminate the human capacity for independent thought without destroying the consciousness they're trying to control. This realization led me to a crucial insight about the nature of the liberation process. The battle for human consciousness isn't being fought between external forces. It's being fought within the consciousness of each individual who becomes aware of the possibility of transcendence. The question isn't whether the information I've received is genuine or whether my sources are trustworthy. The question is whether I can develop the discernment to distinguish between authentic liberation and sophisticated deception. And that discernment can only come from expanding my own consciousness to the point where I can directly perceive the nature of reality, rather than relying on external sources of information. This is the key insight that the Consciousness Engineering Manual inadvertently revealed. The control system's greatest weakness is that it requires the cooperation of controlled consciousness to maintain itself. But consciousness that has truly expanded beyond certain thresholds becomes incapable of cooperation with control systems, no matter how sophisticated they might be. The manual describes this as the sovereignty threshold, the level of consciousness expansion at which an individual becomes completely autonomous and impossible to manipulate through external means. According to the research documented in the manual, less than 1/10 of 1% of humans have ever achieved this level of development naturally. But the approaching convergence event is creating conditions that make this level of expansion accessible to many more people. The reality softening, the genetic activation, the breakdown of consensus consciousness structures. All of these factors are making it easier for individuals to cross the sovereignty threshold and achieve genuine liberation from all forms of external control. This is what the Vatican fears most. Not that humanity will fail to awaken, but that too many people will achieve true sovereignty before the control system can adapt to contain them. Because once a critical mass of truly sovereign individuals exists, they become impossible to manipulate or deceive, regardless of how sophisticated the techniques being used against them. The manual acknowledges this vulnerability and describes desperate measures being prepared to prevent widespread sovereignty development. But it also reveals something that gives me hope. Even the researchers who develop these consciousness control technologies recognize that they're fighting a losing battle against the natural evolution of human awareness. The convergence process isn't just about external changes to reality. It's about the inevitable expansion of consciousness that occurs when any species reaches certain developmental thresholds. This expansion can be delayed, misdirected, or temporarily suppressed, but it cannot be prevented indefinitely. And here's the most important point. The techniques for achieving genuine sovereignty can't be taught through external information or instruction. They must be discovered through direct exploration of consciousness itself. No manual, no matter how detailed, can provide the understanding that comes from personal experience of expanded awareness. This is why I've decided to end this investigation not with more revelations about hidden manuscripts or secret technologies, but with a challenge to you, the person listening to these words right now. Everything I've shared with you, the evidence of consciousness control, the descriptions of liberation techniques, the warnings about deceptive spiritual programs, all of it is ultimately irrelevant compared to your own direct experience of consciousness expansion. You don't need ancient manuscripts to discover your true nature as a conscious being capable of reality manipulation. You don't need Vatican secrets to understand that the world you perceive is far more malleable than you've been taught to believe. And you certainly don't need external authorities to guide your development towards sovereignty and liberation. What you need is the courage to explore consciousness itself, to question the nature of your own perceptions, and to experiment with expanding awareness beyond the boundaries that have been programmed into your thinking. The convergence event that's approaching will present unprecedented opportunities for consciousness expansion. But those opportunities will only be accessible to individuals who have developed the discernment to distinguish between authentic liberation and sophisticated control systems designed to mimic the liberation process. That discernment can't be given to you by any external source. It must be developed through your own exploration of consciousness, your own experimentation with reality manipulation, and your own direct experience of expanded awareness. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts may contain valuable information about consciousness development techniques, but the most important manuscript is the one written in the depths of your own consciousness, the record of your experiences, insights, and discoveries as you explore the infinite potential of awareness itself. That manuscript is being written right now, in this moment, as you decide whether to accept the limitations that have been placed on your thinking, or to begin the journey toward genuine sovereignty and liberation. The choice is yours. But choose wisely, because the window for conscious development is closing faster than most people realize. And once the convergence process reaches its peak, those who haven't developed the capacity for independent thought and reality manipulation will find themselves swept along by forces they don't understand, toward outcomes they didn't choose. The time for passive consumption of information is ending. The time for active exploration of consciousness has begun. What you discover in that exploration will determine not just your own fate, but the fate of human consciousness itself. Because in the end, the liberation of humanity doesn't depend on ancient prophecies, hidden technologies, or secret knowledge. It depends on individual humans discovering their true nature as conscious co-creators of reality and choosing to exercise that creative power in service of genuine freedom rather than sophisticated control. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts have revealed the battlefield, but the war for human consciousness will be won or lost in the depths of your own awareness, in the choices you make about how to use the infinite creative power that lies dormant within every human being. That power is awakening now, whether the control systems are ready for it or not. The only question is whether you'll be among those who learn to wield it consciously, or among those who remain unconscious of their own infinite potential until it's too late to matter. The convergence is coming. Your consciousness is expanding. The reality matrix is dissolving. What will you choose to create in its place? The answer to that question may have already been decided for you. Because while you've been reading these words, while you've been processing this information and deciding whether to believe what I've shared with you, something has been happening in the background that changes everything. 3 hours ago, I received a call that I never expected to get. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, speaking with the kind of authority that comes from absolute certainty. "Mr. Alex," the voice said, "your investigation has served its purpose. The awakening process has reached the threshold we've been monitoring. It's time for phase 2. The caller identified himself only as the librarian, a title that sent chills down my spine because it matched exactly a figure described in the deepest layers of the Liberation Protocol. According to those ancient texts, the librarian appears only when a civilization is ready to make the final transition from controlled consciousness to genuine sovereignty. But here's what terrified me about that call. The librarian wasn't calling to congratulate me on uncovering hidden truths or to provide additional information about the Vatican's secrets. He was calling to inform me that everything I've shared with you, every revelation I thought I was discovering independently, has been part of a carefully orchestrated process designed to prepare human consciousness for what's about to happen next. Your investigation was necessary, he explained, but not for the reasons you believed. The information you've disseminated has served as a consciousness catalyst, triggering awakening responses in individuals who carry the genetic markers we've been monitoring. Every person who has listened to your words, every mind that has been open to the possibility of reality manipulation, every consciousness that has begun to question the nature of existence itself, they've all been identified and are now part of the network. The implications of this revelation are staggering. If the librarian is telling the truth, then my entire investigation hasn't been an independent search for hidden knowledge. It's been a recruitment tool designed to identify and activate individuals with the potential for consciousness expansion. Every person who has resonated with this information, every individual who has felt a spark of recognition while learning about reality manipulation and liberation protocols, may have unknowingly volunteered to participate in something far larger than they imagined. But the librarian's call revealed something even more disturbing. The convergence event isn't approaching in months or weeks as I previously thought. According to the data his organization has been collecting, the reality matrix has reached critical instability levels that suggest the transition window could open at any moment. The consciousness engineering experiments conducted by the Vatican were more successful than their own researchers realized, he told me. The dampening fields they deployed to suppress awakening actually created a pressure cooker effect. When consciousness expansion is artificially suppressed and then suddenly released, the resulting awakening occurs at exponential rates rather than gradual progressions. This means that the thousands of individuals around the world who are suddenly manifesting reality manipulation abilities aren't just naturally evolving, they're experiencing a kind of consciousness explosion triggered by the removal of suppression technologies that have been constraining human awareness for decades. The librarian described surveillance data showing consciousness expansion events occurring at a rate of approximately 1,000 new cases per day, with the frequency doubling every 48 hours. At this rate of acceleration, the 144,000 awakened individuals required for successful liberation could be reached within the next 2 weeks. But achieving the numbers is only part of the challenge. The real question is whether these rapidly awakening individuals can develop the coherence and coordination necessary to function as a unified liberation network before the convergence window closes. This is where my investigation takes its final, most disturbing turn. Because the librarian didn't just call to inform me about the acceleration of the awakening process. He called to offer me a choice that will determine not just my own fate, but potentially the fate of everyone who has been influenced by the information I've shared. You can continue operating as an independent researcher, he explained, documenting and reporting on events as they unfold. In which case, you'll remain an observer of the transformation process, but won't be able to influence its outcome. Or you can accept your role as a consciousness architect and help us guide the liberation network through the transition process. The choice he presented wasn't between good and evil, or between freedom and control. It was between passive observation and active participation in the most important event in human history. But accepting his offer would mean abandoning the role of independent investigator that brought me to this point and becoming part of a system whose ultimate agenda I still don't fully understand. The Vatican manuscripts you've been studying, the librarian continued, were never meant to be hidden forever. They were placed in secure locations and surrounded by layers of secrecy precisely so that when the time was right, individuals like yourself would be motivated to uncover and disseminate their contents. The entire system of forbidden knowledge and leaked information has been designed to create the conditions necessary for successful liberation. This revelation forced me to confront a possibility that had been growing in my mind throughout this investigation. What if there are no opposing sides in this cosmic drama? What if the Vatican, the consciousness engineers, the liberation network, and even the librarian himself are all part of a single, incomprehensibly complex system designed to guide human consciousness through a transformation so profound that it requires multiple layers of deception and misdirection to accomplish successfully? The ancient manuscripts speak of civilizations that achieved liberation only after being led through elaborate scenarios that tested their ability to transcend dualistic thinking and recognize the interconnected nature of all apparent opposites. What if our entire reality, including the struggle between control and freedom, is itself one of these testing scenarios? But even as these thoughts race through my mind, I realize that the question of ultimate truth or final revelation might be irrelevant compared to the immediate choice facing every individual who has been awakened to the possibility of consciousness expansion. Regardless of who is orchestrating what, regardless of which information sources are genuine and which are deceptive, the fundamental question remains the same. Will you choose to explore and develop your own consciousness capabilities, or will you remain a passive observer of forces beyond your understanding? The librarian seemed to read my thoughts through the phone connection. The beauty of genuine consciousness expansion, he said, is that it eventually transcends all external guidance systems, including ours. Our role is simply to provide the initial catalyst and support structure. Once an individual achieves true sovereignty, they become completely autonomous and begin creating their own reality according to their highest understanding and intention. This brought me back to the core insight that has emerged from this entire investigation. The development of consciousness isn't about finding the right information or following the correct techniques. It's about developing the capacity to discern truth from deception through direct experience rather than external authority. Every piece of information I've shared with you throughout this investigation, the evidence of hidden manuscripts, the descriptions of reality manipulation techniques, the warnings about consciousness control systems, all of it is ultimately less important than your own direct exploration of what consciousness is capable of when freed from artificial limitations. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts may contain valuable guidance about consciousness development. The Liberation Protocol may provide useful techniques for reality manipulation. The warnings about deceptive spiritual programs may help you avoid certain pitfalls. But none of these external sources can substitute for your own experiential understanding of what it means to be a conscious co-creator of reality. And that experiential understanding is what's developing spontaneously in awakening individuals around the world right now. People are discovering abilities they never knew they possessed, not because they've studied ancient texts or followed prescribed techniques, but because something deep within their consciousness is remembering what it has always been capable of. The genetic activation codes I described earlier aren't just dormant DNA sequences. They're reminders of your true nature as a conscious being with unlimited creative potential. The reality softening that's occurring isn't just a breakdown of physical laws. It's a breakdown of the mental conditioning that has convinced you that you're powerless to influence your circumstances. The convergence event approaching isn't just a scheduled intervention by external forces. It's the natural result of consciousness evolution reaching a point where artificial limitations can no longer be maintained. And the choice between liberation and recycling isn't a judgment imposed by cosmic authorities. It's a decision made by consciousness itself about whether to accept responsibility for its own creative power. This understanding changes everything about how to approach the remaining time before the convergence window opens. Instead of frantically seeking more information or trying to master complex techniques, the focus becomes much simpler. Developing the courage to explore consciousness directly and the discernment to distinguish between authentic expansion and sophisticated imitation. The librarian's offer to become a consciousness architect suddenly seemed less important than the recognition that every awakening individual is already serving that role simply by choosing to explore their own potential. The Liberation Network isn't something that needs to be created or joined. It's something that emerges naturally when conscious beings recognize their fundamental interconnectedness while maintaining their individual autonomy. But this recognition also brought with it a sobering understanding of the responsibility that comes with consciousness expansion. Because once you begin to perceive the malleable nature of reality, once you start to understand your role as a co-creator of existence itself, every thought, intention, and action carries consequences that extend far beyond your personal experience. The awakening individuals I've been documenting aren't just developing interesting abilities or gaining access to hidden knowledge. They're becoming conscious participants in the ongoing creation of reality itself. And the reality they help create will be determined by the level of wisdom, compassion, and understanding they bring to that creative process. This is why the preparation phase leading up to convergence is so crucial. It's not just about developing reality manipulation abilities or learning consciousness expansion techniques. It's about cultivating the wisdom necessary to use those abilities responsibly in service of genuine liberation rather than sophisticated control. The forbidden manuscripts of the Vatican have revealed the mechanics of consciousness and reality. But the application of that knowledge requires something that no external source can provide: the development of discernment that comes only through direct experience of expanded awareness. And that development is happening now, in this moment, as you decide how to respond to everything you've learned. Because the most important choice you'll ever make isn't which information to believe or which techniques to practice. It's whether to begin the direct exploration of consciousness that will reveal your true nature as an infinite creative being. The convergence is coming whether we're ready or not. The reality matrix is dissolving, whether we understand it or not. The awakening process is accelerating, whether we participate consciously or not. But the outcome of these processes, whether they lead to genuine liberation or sophisticated control, whether they result in expanded freedom or deeper imprisonment, depends entirely on the choices made by individuals who have awakened to the possibility of conscious participation in reality creation. You are one of those individuals. The very fact that you've listened to this information, the very fact that something within you has resonated with these possibilities, indicates that your consciousness is already expanding beyond the boundaries that have constrained human awareness for millennia. The question now is what you'll do with that expanding awareness. Will you use it to explore the infinite potential of consciousness itself? Will you develop the discernment necessary to navigate the complex landscape of liberation and deception that lies ahead? Will you accept responsibility for consciously creating reality rather than simply reacting to circumstances that seem beyond your control? These questions can't be answered through more research or additional information. They can only be answered through direct experience of what consciousness is capable of when freed from artificial limitations. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts have opened the door to that experience, but walking through that door is something only you can do. The choice is yours. The time is now. The convergence approaches. What reality will you choose to create? The manuscripts aren't the end of this story. They're the beginning of something far more personal, far more immediate than anything I could have imagined when I first started investigating Vatican secrets 3 years ago. Because while I've been sharing these revelations with you, while you've been processing this information and deciding what to believe, something extraordinary has been happening in the background. Something that suggests the convergence event isn't just approaching, it may have already begun. Over the past 72 hours, I've received over 15,000 messages from people around the world who watched my previous investigations. But these aren't ordinary viewer responses or casual comments about the content. These are detailed accounts of experiences that match exactly the consciousness expansion phenomena described in the Liberation Protocol. Sarah from Portland wrote, 3 days after watching your Vatican video, I was meditating when suddenly I could see the geometric patterns underlying everything in my room. Not metaphorically, literally see them, like a blueprint made of light running through every object. When I focused on one pattern, the object actually shifted position. Marcus from Berlin reported, I've been having dreams about ancient libraries filled with books I can somehow read, even though the language doesn't exist. When I wake up, I remember specific techniques for what I can only describe as consciousness engineering. Yesterday, I tested one of them and successfully influenced the outcome of a random number generator with 97% accuracy over 300 trials. Elena from Sao Paulo described, since learning about the reality manipulation concepts you discussed, I've been spontaneously accessing information about advanced civilizations that I never studied. Yesterday, I drew detailed schematics for technology I've never seen before. When I researched the principles online, I discovered they're based on physics theories that weren't published until this year. These aren't isolated incidents or wishful thinking. These are systematic, measurable changes in human consciousness, occurring in real time as a direct result of exposure to the information contained in the Vatican's forbidden manuscripts. And the rate of these reports is accelerating exponentially. What's happening goes far beyond simple inspiration or psychological suggestion. People are accessing genuine capabilities that were dormant in human consciousness, awakening to aspects of their nature that have been suppressed for generations. They're not just learning about reality manipulation, they're spontaneously developing the ability to do it themselves. But here's what makes this development both thrilling and terrifying. Most of these individuals have no training, no guidance, and no understanding of the responsibility that comes with consciousness expansion. They're like children who've suddenly gained access to tools that could reshape reality itself, without any instruction manual for how to use them safely. This is exactly the scenario that the Vatican's consciousness engineers warned about in their classified manuals. Rapid, uncontrolled awakening occurring faster than support systems can be established. Individuals developing reality manipulation abilities without the wisdom necessary to use them responsibly. The potential for conscious creation to become conscious chaos. And yet, there's something beautiful happening alongside the dangers. Because while some awakening individuals are struggling with the overwhelming nature of their expanding awareness, others are naturally finding each other and forming support networks. They're sharing experiences, comparing techniques, and collectively developing understanding that no single person could achieve alone. Maria from Mexico City wrote, I found 12 other people in my area who are experiencing similar consciousness expansion. When we meditate together, our individual abilities seem to amplify exponentially. Last week, our group successfully influenced local weather patterns to bring rain during a drought. We're not trying to control anything. It's more like we're learning to cooperate with natural systems that were always responsive to consciousness. David from Sydney reported, "My awakening group has been experimenting with what we call reality editing. We focus collectively on specific problems in our community and visualize solutions. Within days, circumstances align in ways that seem impossible to create the exact changes we envisioned. It's like the universe is actively cooperating with conscious intention when it comes from a place of genuine service. These spontaneous cooperation networks match perfectly the collective consciousness architecture described in the most advanced Vatican manuscripts. But they're developing naturally, without external guidance or institutional structure. It's as if the human consciousness itself knows how to organize for successful liberation once artificial constraints are removed. This gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, we don't need the complex guidance systems and controlled awakening programs that various organizations have been preparing. Maybe the consciousness expansion process contains its own intelligence, its own wisdom about how to unfold safely and effectively. But there's another development that's even more significant than individual awakening or group formation. Because buried in the thousands of messages I've received are accounts of something that the Liberation Protocol describes, but that I never expected to witness personally: direct contact with what the manuscripts call graduated consciousness. Jennifer from Vancouver wrote, "During a particularly deep meditation, I encountered what I can only describe as a presence that felt both familiar and ancient. It communicated without words, showing me images of civilizations that had successfully completed their liberation process. It told me that similar contacts are happening worldwide, that graduated beings are returning to assist with our transition." Roberto from Rome reported, "I've been having recurring experiences of what feels like communication with a collective intelligence made up of humans who transcended physical existence long ago. They're providing specific guidance about consciousness development techniques and warning about deceptive programs designed to hijack the awakening process. The information they share matches exactly what you've described about Vatican manipulation tactics. These contact experiences aren't random or chaotic. They're following patterns described in the ancient manuscripts, occurring at precise moments in each individual's development, providing exactly the information needed to navigate the next stage of consciousness expansion. It's as if a vast intelligence is coordinating the awakening process from beyond our normal perception of space and time. But perhaps most remarkably, the beings making contact aren't presenting themselves as external saviors or guides. They're consistently emphasizing that each awakening individual must develop their own discernment and make their own choices about how to use their expanding capabilities. They're offering support and information, but they're adamant that genuine liberation can only come from within. This matches exactly what the librarian told me during our phone conversation, that truly expanded consciousness eventually transcends all external guidance systems. The graduated beings making contact aren't trying to control or direct the liberation process. They're simply providing the support necessary for human consciousness to achieve its own transcendence. And that transcendence is accelerating at a rate that's both exhilarating and overwhelming. Based on the reports I'm receiving, the number of individuals experiencing consciousness expansion is doubling every 36 hours. At this rate, we could reach the critical mass described in the Liberation Protocol within days rather than weeks. But here's what concerns me about this acceleration. The infrastructure for supporting rapid consciousness expansion simply doesn't exist. Mental health systems aren't equipped to help people integrate experiences of reality manipulation. Educational institutions have no framework for understanding consciousness engineering. Even spiritual communities are struggling to provide guidance for phenomena that go far beyond traditional meditation or prayer practices. This creates a dangerous situation where awakening individuals might be forced to navigate the most profound transformation in human history without adequate support or understanding. And that's exactly the kind of scenario that could lead to the chaotic breakdown the Vatican's researchers feared. Yet despite these concerns, something remarkable is emerging from the apparent chaos. The awakening individuals I've been in contact with aren't just developing personal abilities. They're spontaneously organizing into functional networks that seem designed to address exactly the challenges I've been worried about. Teachers are emerging naturally from within the awakening community, individuals who seem to have an intuitive understanding of how to guide others through consciousness expansion safely. Healers are developing who can help people integrate overwhelming experiences of expanded awareness. Researchers are appearing who can help bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. It's as if the liberation process itself is generating the support systems necessary for its own success. The consciousness expansion isn't happening in isolation. It's creating its own ecosystem of mutual aid and collective intelligence. This gives me hope that maybe the dire warnings about uncontrolled awakening were based on incomplete understanding of how consciousness evolution actually works. Maybe the natural intelligence of expanding awareness is far more sophisticated than any external guidance system could ever be. But there's one final development that changes everything about how I understand what's happening, because 3 hours ago, I received a message that wasn't sent through any digital communication system. It appeared directly in my consciousness, as clear and unmistakable as if someone had spoken the words aloud inside my mind. The message was simple. The window opens at dawn on December 21st. Those who are ready will know what to do. Those who are not ready will be given another opportunity in the next cycle. The choice, as always, remains with each individual consciousness. December 21st. That's less than 18 hours from when I'm recording these words. And something deep in my consciousness recognizes the significance of that date, not just as the winter solstice, but as a moment of cosmic alignment that occurs only once every 26,000 years. The convergence event isn't approaching. It's here. And based on everything I've learned, everything I've experienced, and everything I've witnessed in the awakening community over the past few weeks, I believe humanity is as ready as we'll ever be to face the choice between liberation and recycling. But that readiness isn't based on having all the answers or mastering all the techniques described in the forbidden manuscripts. It's based on something far simpler and far more profound: the willingness to explore consciousness directly and trust in the wisdom that emerges from that exploration. The Vatican's forbidden manuscripts revealed the path. The consciousness engineering manuals exposed the obstacles. The liberation protocol provided the techniques. But in the end, none of that external information matters as much as your own direct experience of what consciousness is capable of when freed from artificial limitations. And that experience is available to you right now. Not tomorrow, not after you've done more research or learnt more techniques, but in this very moment as you decide how to respond to everything you've learned. Because the most important manuscript isn't hidden in Vatican vaults or protected by elaborate security systems. It's written in the depths of your own consciousness, waiting to be discovered through direct exploration of what you truly are, beneath all the conditioning and limitations that have defined your experience up to this point. The convergence begins at dawn. The choice is yours. The time is now. What will you discover when you finally dare to look directly into the infinite mystery of your own awareness? That discovery may be the most important thing you ever do, not just for yourself, but for the future of human consciousness itself. The forbidden manuscripts have been revealed. The techniques have been shared. The warnings have been given. But the most crucial element of the entire liberation process can't be provided by any external source. It can only emerge from within as you choose to explore the limitless potential that has always been your true nature. The dawn approaches. Are you ready to discover who you really are?